Okay, it's about time. Let's get started. On the next speaker is Dr. Hiratsuka Sakaki, and he's fresh out of PhD program in New Zealand, Auckland, and so we can listen to a really interesting perspective because this group is kind of toward biased toward quantitative approach. So, yeah. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hiratsuka.
Thank you very much for your introduction. My name is Sakaki Hiratsuka. I'm very grateful that I can be part of this wonderful conference here in Okinawa, where I started working just 3 months ago. Today, I would like to talk about narrative frames as a data collection method in TESOL. As Mitsumoto Sensei was saying, if I have to take a wild guess, probably I am one of the very few qualitative-oriented researchers among today's participants. As such, before I explain and describe this one particular qualitative data collection method, narrative frames, I'd like to talk more generally about narrative research. Definitions of narrative research differ according to the disciplines in which they are embedded. What counts narrative or narrative research, therefore, varies depending on fields such as literature, sociology, medicine, and education, or more germane to us, TESOL. Within the latter field, education TESOL, one definition of narrative research was put forth by Connelly and Crandon. They are Canadian researchers. Simply, it is the study of experience as story. Connelly and Crandon understand narrative research as an exploration of content and context in terms of 3 dimensions relating to 1, temporality, that is, the times, past, present, and future in which experiences unfold. And second, place, that is, the sequence of places in which experiences lived. And lastly, 3, sociality, that is, personal emotions, desires, and the interactions between people. Now, the research, including these characteristics, is understood as narrative inquiry, narrative research, and this method, many people believe, is situated in the matrix of qualitative research. And it is a matter of time, many people believe, again, that more and more researchers and classroom teachers engage with the community of narrative inquiry, so to speak, and recognize the importance of collecting stories in order to examine language teaching and learning, hence language teachers and learners. One of the data collection methods that has been used to conduct narrative research is narrative frames, which uses prompts to stimulate written expression of ideas. This definition is a little bit blurred and vague, but although this method appeared in the TESOL field relatively recently, several researchers have employed this method in these studies. For example, in Japan, in Vietnam, in China, and in New Zealand. Now, I'd like to show an illustrative case, a study into how students learn using narrative frames. This is a study with Japanese high school students I conducted a couple of years ago, but published this year. Before going into this illustrative case, I'd like you to take a look at the narrative frames I used with Japanese high school students. And there are 2 pages, one being Japanese narrative frames, and second being English narrative frames. If this is enough. In this study, did you get these frames? In this study, 36 second-year high school students watched a video clip taped from their previous team taught class, and afterwards completed these narrative frames that asked about their classes, their teachers, and themselves, and reasons for their comments. So they completed those narrative frames, both in Japanese and in English, within 30 minutes. And they completed these narrative frames on 3 different occasions over the course of 4 months. In other words, they wrote the same format narrative frames first, and then there's probably a window of time of 2 months, 3 months, until they wrote the second one, and then again 3-month break, and then they wrote the third one. Let's take a moment here and think about what and in what way your students in your classes in 1 or 2 of your courses would respond using these narrative frames. This is used with Japanese high school students, but what about your students in your particular context? What would they write? And if you were to employ these narrative frames as needs analysis or other different purposes, what changes would you make and why? Maybe you could talk to each other with the neighbors and these mothers, and I'll give you about like a couple of minutes. Could you please talk about these mothers with your neighbors? Please start talking to each other.
自分の授業を取ったビデオを見るってことでしょ。自分の授業が生徒が自分の授業の様子を撮ったビデオを見るってことです。僕がしといた自分の授業のビデオを見て振り返るってことでしょ。人が振り返る。そうそう。自分が映ってるビデオを見る。で、どう変えるか。このフレーズとかをどう変えるか。フレームワークやフレームだから、これをフレームとかをどう変えるかっていうこと。これがどうやってできたかわからないから、なんとも。
Okay, thank you very much. Getting back to my study, in this particular study, there are 2 salient findings, and one concerned that the students became responsible for learning in general by completing those narrative frames, and the second one is related to the students becoming more serious about English language learning in particular. I will look into that in detail now. The students had never previously been given the opportunity to offer their ideas with their experiences, with their English classes experiences, and they never made any suggestions for future classes in a detailed way. However, the students in this study appear to have reflected on classroom practices more critically with the frames, and provided their opinions about the classes as responsible learners. What this means is that there are some students who wrote their comments like this. These excerpts were taken from their Japanese narrative frames, and I translated the Japanese into English. First student, for example, said that I thought the class was easier to understand compared to the classes only by a Japanese teacher of English. Second student, another student, for example, stated that I thought Tom. This was the feedback, so to speak, on the team taught classes. So Tom is the pseudonym for an assistant language teacher, spoke more and communicated with us more than before. Another student yet said that the teachers should allow us to take more time to think about what we said, rather than giving feedback right away. So to me, these comments exemplify the fact that the students started to become more responsible for their learning in general. Moving on to the second category. As the students had narrative frames in English as well as Japanese, they not only offered their opinions about their classes, but also gained a chance to construct original English sentences based on their personal experience. In fact, the number of the students, as well as the English words written on English narrative frames, increased as they completed their narrative frames repeatedly. From being 3 students with the total numbers of English 67 to by the end of this study, there's 19 students who wrote English narrative frames with the total numbers of 430. At the end of this study, I conducted semi-structured interviews with 2 students from the class, one being female student, the other being male student. And this is what the male student had to say. He said that it was my first time to be asked to write that kind of English composition. I could not write well, but it was refreshing nonetheless. But what I have to use this English word in the end was something like that. For example, the English tests. I think he is referring to the term exams or the midterm exams. We were asked to write a sentence with 8 words or so, but I was not good at using conjunctions. But after seeing the frame, I made a discovery. Wow, conjunctions can be put in particular places like this. This interview excerpt was translated by me into English, and to me, at least this particular male student has been more serious about learning English language, in particular with regard to the conjunctions, one of the linguistics feature of English, of course we know. So findings that suggest that the students, the narrative frames became a starting point for these Japanese high school students to express themselves and to provide their opinions for subsequent classes in a detailed way. The narrative frames also served as a forum, so to speak, where the students could practice and learn English by writing meaningful sentences, leading them to become more serious about English language learning in particular. In concluding today's presentation, I'd like to go over some of the major advantages and disadvantages of using narrative frames. First of all, advantages. One advantage being that the narrative frames enable respondents to write narratively by scaffolding them through the specially designed narrative structure. What this means is that narrative frames is not merely questionnaire or survey, but the outcome of it is going to be more enriching and detailed data that other qualitative research methods can offer too. The second one is, by the way, these advantages and disadvantages I am addressing here is taken from mainly from the work of Gary Birkusen in 2014. The article published in System Journal, so if you are interested in this, please refer to that. The second being that the design of the frames ensures, or should ensure, that researchers obtain the information they want. In other words, researchers are the ones who are making, organizing, and controlling the narrative frame prompts. So they can focus on the topic or the theme or interest they want to collect from the participants. Relating to this point, the third advantage identified is that the frames limit the quantity of data. From the viewpoint of researchers, it is a good thing always to have a control over the quantity of the data, isn't it? Although there are some advantages like this, there are also disadvantages addressed in literature. The first disadvantage is that some respondents may need to desire more space for different topics. As I said previously, the narrative frames were written and made by researchers, not by the participants. Participants might want to write more than the space given, or they might want to write on different topics. So we cannot really give the authority to the participants as we wish as qualitative researchers. The second disadvantage is there may be prompts which are interpreted in a way not intended by researchers. Unless we researchers give proper and appropriate instruction, the respondents might misunderstand what the prompts are for, and they might write something the researchers didn't intend the respondents to write. Lastly, respondents might write a list of unconnected ideas. The premise of narrative frames is that the respondents write a coherent story by filling gaps of different varying length. But if they write unconnected ideas, it's not a story as a whole, so it is limited in the content as well as the quantity, the outcome of the data is. And the last point is that responses might be depersonalized in the process of data analysis. What this means is that if the researchers are quantifying the outcome of the data and put numbers on individual responses, individual participants, that is at odds with the idea of qualitative research, where we are embracing the particularities and the idiosyncrasies. So by numbering the prompts answers, this is against the epistemology of qualitative research, is what I wanted to say. So I hope today's talk will engender further exploration of the construction and the use of the narrative research in the future. And these are the selected references I have used in this presentation, and you can contact me on my cell phone or through email. Or you can probably give me some comments or questions for the next 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Few comments or questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
After collecting data, qualitative data using these formats, how would you analyze data? Is there any standardized way to analyze? Or?
Well, we have several ways to analyze that. What I have used for this particular study is that I basically use the content analysis, the qualitative content analysis, Connelly and Crampton, or the Bogdan and Bigsen in 2007. So when you collect data, first of all, you can read the story as a whole from individual person and one by one. And second process of the data analysis is that you will put the responses from, for example, from first prompt, and then if there are 36 students responded for this particular prompt. The first prompt, for example, I have just watched the video clip and blah, blah, blah. The first prompt's answers will be put in the same page. And so you will be able to see the data as a story, 36 different stories, and then I can also look at the data collected for the same prompt, the first prompt or the second prompt and then third prompt. So with that multiple data analysis, focusing on the themes, different themes, we will, I come up with, for example, code, and then themes, and then eventually categories. And I came up with those two categories I just mentioned in the presentation.
So in that sense, you don't care about who said that prompt?
Well, if some of the prompts are, some of the responses are very like salient and important, where I will go back to that particular person. And if, in an ideal sense, I'd like to have an interview with them so that I can scrutinize the exact responses and how and why they are made. And that's the fine line between narrative research. Narrative frames is a qualitative data collection method or quantitative corrected method, because if I, as you said, don't go back to that particular person and then quantify how many students wrote this and how many students wrote that, then that's not exactly what the qualitative research is about, but rather being towards the idea of quantitative research. So it depends on the researcher, I would say, and then how much they believe what the narrative research is about. And that's the judgment each researcher will take, I think.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
any other questions, comments?
Yes.
I fully agree that giving frames like this will encourage students to write more, and I see the point. But at the same time, thinking about the exploratory nature of this type of research, I was wondering if giving these frames might actually limit what students can say, and then that's one of the disadvantages. And then I was wondering how you, in this particular case, created this frame, and then if there was any theoretical or empirical support for asking these questions or making these frames, rather than
Coming up with
exactly. Yes.
Yeah, they're just at random. Well, first of all, what I valued is my personal experience of being a high school teacher. And the students were studying at similar schools to where I worked. So I kind of had some general and probably a little bit insightful ideas in terms of what they want to do and then what they have not done before. And in combination with that, I, of course, went back to the literature of narrative frames since 2007, that's when the narrative frames were originated by Berkhuizen and Rosemary Vett. But so I referred to those narrative frames used in different contexts before, and I also combined my personal experience as a high school teacher in the similar context to constructing that narrative frames, is what I say. And early researchers only came up with the starters of the narrative frames, but I also felt the necessity to kind of include conjunctions in the middle of the sentences so that students would be encouraged to write longer, more in a detailed way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was wondering if this was only one-shot study, or have you done any follow-up sessions?
Pilot study, are you saying?
As far as I understand, the narrative, the use of narrative is when the people recreate their past and try to understand their past in a more coherent way. So if you have them repeat their stories over and over, it gets more coherent.
So it's not the past pilot study in the sense that I am probably judging the validity of the narrative frames as a data collection with these particular participants, but you are talking about the repetition of participants writing narrative frames. Yes, I have asked the participants to write narrative frames 3 times over the course of 4 months.
And did you see any development?
Yes. I saw the difference in terms of, well, as I said, in terms of the English narrative frames, they wrote more and in enriching way.
Was there any evidence of developing meta-awareness or language?
Meta-analysis was no, I didn't do any of the linguistic examination from the English narrative frames, but that's one of the analysis way in which I can take in the future studies.
So don't you have to eventually ask them about the language and the details of language, how they think about
No, I
language?
thought that would be guiding, so I didn't ask them specifically in terms of how they felt to regarding the improvement of their English writing, because if I did, then I thought, especially in the middle of the study, if I did, then it's kind of guiding them to the direction where I want them to be. So
Well,
I
you are
think
guiding anyway.
Say that again.
But you are guiding anyway. So
I'm writing
you have to-
anyway.
You are guiding them anyway. So you have to.
Ah,
ask them
that's
what they're
that's
doing.
not the. I'm guiding in the way that they can be scaffolded in writing their ideas, not necessarily English language itself.
Alright.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns?
Thank you very much.
Would it be different if you, instead of giving a frame like this, does it make any difference if you give them a series of questions like, what do you think about this video? Why do you think so? And so that would probably get the same kinds of responses. And I was wondering if there is any difference between giving a frame like this or asking questions and then letting them answer those questions.
Well, this is the whole point of narrative researchers starting to employ this frames. If we are giving the semi-structured interview prompts, then that's not a prompt, it's the question. Well, some researchers want to analyze the collected narrative frames as story, as a whole, and with giving the semi-structured questions like that would not lead to a story as a whole. And some rich data can only come about based on the narrative frames which has the prompts for allowing the participants to write a coherent story. So it would be an interesting study if we can see the differences between the semi-structured questions, answers, and the narrative frames, prompts, responses. So that would be something I can do in the future. Maybe we should do it. But yeah, that's a valid and rational point, I would say.
Interesting.
Any other questions? So, I thought that your research was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Glad that you gave us the different and new perspectives in a different research paradigm.
Yes, definitely.
But I pretend that I'm a novice researcher, and I don't definitely not mean to put you into the corner.
No.
But
I'd like to be in the corner.
Ask you. We ask you this question. Comment is you are judgmental, and you think this is what you this is what you think.
Yes,
and,
definitely.
You cannot generalize this research data.
I'm not
And
after
how do you
generalization.
respond to that?
I'm not after generalization. I'm only interested in some particular cases where I can see as a teacher of them, and if other researchers want to refer to my study, they can judge the transferability of my research based on the context I described in my research, as well as the participants I outlined. So I'm not after generalization, as no qualitative research is aiming to do so.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much.